Okay, I thought what we could talk about tonight is forgiveness. And actually, the motivation for doing that was the last session that we had 2 weeks ago was there was a question right at the end of the session about forgiveness related to that in some way. And there just wasn't enough time to answer that sufficiently. So I wanted to take the time to really explore that more fully. It's not that forgiveness is necessarily even spiritual in nature, but its importance to spirituality is that if there's some pain, some hurt that is sticky, that's pulling our attention often back into that pain, and we're not willing to forgive that consumes energy, it consumes psychic life energy, just plain and simple. So if we find ourselves in that position, it can consume a lot of our energy that we could use, say, more productively to explore things at a deeper level. It tends to hold us at a more surface level. So one of the things about forgiveness is, well, first of all, it's a loaded word, right? You know, even though the mention of the word forgiveness, tends to be a, you know, an attitude that we have towards that. So we can look at forgiveness in a really simplistic way. So it's at its utter simplicity, it's sort of a two-step process, right? First, we get hurt. And then at some later point, we may or may not feel compelled to forgive. So two steps. First, you get hurt, then maybe at some later point, we forgive. But if we try to forgive too soon, it just feels artificial, right? It's almost like you know pulling a scab off before the wound is healed. So if we really feel back into it, I mean, a lot of these deeper hurts have originated in childhood. Not always. I mean, we can sustain some really deep hurts in adulthood too. If we were, you know, if there was a messy divorce, if we were felt like we were unjustifiably lost a job, if we felt like someone took advantage of us financially, you know, someone mentally abused us in a relationship over a period of time. I mean, there's plenty of opportunities in adulthood as well, but often there are hurts that have originated in childhood. And, you know, maybe it's just, maybe it's a one-time thing that's so powerful that it remained with us. Or maybe it's sort of a chronic sort of diminishment of who we were as children, you know, always sort of, you know, parents thinking less of us, accusing us of things we didn't do, you know, saying that we're not capable, saying that we're not smart, that we're not attractive, this or that. So those kind of persistent patterns as a young child can, you know, sort of settle into the body. It's not like as young children we have the capacity or the mental skills or the you know, the really the independence to really deal with that kind of information coming at us from people that are bigger and seemingly knowing more than we do. And it's easy to conclude, well, maybe they're right. So that could just be an ongoing kind of thing in childhood. But then there could also be really charged events where it was much more dramatic. You know, if it was charged with physical abuse, sexual abuse, as children. I mean, where do we even go with that? I mean, where do we even begin to deal with that? You know, it's often in those kind of histories we can, if we can even remember it clearly, there's sort of great uncertainty about whether the other person was to blame or whether I caused it, or back and forth. And it's usually just a chaotic swirl of emotions without resolution at all. And that can be carried into adulthood. You know, not all hurt needs to be that dramatic. I mean, if we're having a good day and someone says something a little bit off to us, you know, we might let it go. Right? But these are the stickier events, the ones that truly cause us pain, the ones that we don't see a clear resolution to at all, tend to remain with us in a way that it feels like it is just part of us. You know, there's not even daylight between it and us. It's just like, well, that's who I am. I've been victimized. I've been hurt. I've been abused. That's who I am. And it can feel like a stain that can never go away, in a sense. So at that point, if those emotions are that raw and someone comes along and say, well, what you really need to do is forgive the other person, it's like, hell no. You know, it's like, it's, you know, it's almost like an outrage to suggest that to a person in that depth of hurt and despair. You know, to even try to forgive in that state of mind would just necessitate us invalidating our own feelings. You know, just ignore what you feel and forgive the other person. Why? You know, well, it's the right thing to do. You know, it's the religious thing to do. You know, you should do it because you're really a good person. You know, maybe there's some spiritual benefit, some payoff if you do it. You know, but what we've introduced is just another concept into this turmoil, where we have the hurt, the pain, the despair, the anger, the rage, and then we have this other idea, well, I shouldn't feel like that. I should really be forgiving. So now we have two ideas raging around. One is I've been hurt, and you know, there's someone to blame. Maybe it's the other person, maybe it's myself, maybe who knows. And then there's this idea of, well, I shouldn't feel that. I should be forgiving. So now we have two opposing beliefs. One is how I really feel, and the other is how I should feel. So anytime we introduce the word should into the equation, we should be on our toes, because it's denying what we actually feel. So we have these two opposing ideas, and somehow we believe that you know, they'll fight it out on the battlefield of our mind. And, you know, if we're really a good person, the forgiveness will win out, and we'll somehow manage to, you know, stow away this hurt. But if we're not ready to go there, that hurt just isn't going to go away that easily. It's not going to go away by introducing the concept of forgiveness. if we try to do that, even if we can sort of, by just sheer willpower, sheer personal will, sort of squeeze a statement of forgiveness out of ourselves. I'm not even talking about saying it to the other person. I'm just saying being able to say it to ourselves even, squeeze the sense of forgiveness out of ourselves. It just won't be authentic, right? It just won't have any power behind it. We can try to come up with a conceptual position where it feels like, well, maybe I could do that. Maybe I can imagine myself as such a magnanimous person that I could forgive even that person. And then I feel good about myself, right? Because I'm this big magnanimous person, and that person really screwed up, but because I have such a big heart, I'll forgive them. So now we're doing it from a sense of superiority. This is my way to, retain my pride, my self-esteem by sort of enlarging myself enough by personal will to extend a relief. Usually it's not a blanket relief, right? It's just like, for this particular situation, particular exemption for this one incident. But, typically you sort of hold in reserve the right to blame them for anything that they screw up with later on. So we see it's a really, we sort of dole out a little bit at a time here. Or we sort of sit in, sort of a godlike position that says, okay, let's see, I think I'm prepared to forgive that person, but not that person. I've got my standards, this person, okay, maybe I've held a grudge against that person for long enough. I'm willing to let that person off the hook then, but not that person, right? So we've still maintained our personal separate self position of feeling in the right? It's almost like we feel like it's up to us to sort of defend justice, right? If we let this other person off the hook, who's obviously, the guilty person, one to blame in this situation, if we let them off the hook, who knows? It's sort of a slippery slope. If I let that person go, the world is sort of chaotic enough already. If I let this person off the hook, it's just, who knows where that'll end up. Maybe it's the final, my holding on to my righteousness is the last thing holding justice in the world. So we can play all kinds of mental games to try to justify our unforgiveness. So in terms of maintaining that sense of personal separate self, actually any unforgiveness will do. It doesn't have to be, a massive amount. Any unforgiveness will do, because it's that point at which we hold on to that sense of, I know I'm right. And I know that the other person is wrong, and I'm going to be the one to judge that. Okay, so we're still nowhere near close enough to be even talking about actual forgiveness yet, because there's still that hurt, that basis for hanging on. I've been harmed, I've been wronged by this other person. They shouldn't have done it, and I'm not willing to let that go. No matter how righteous forgiveness may sound, I ain't going there. So at that point, if something is that sticky, that's remained for years, maybe decades, maybe since childhood, that where we just can't let it go. There's no way to force that. As we said, to try to force that is a diminishment of ourselves. It's the diminishment of what's actually true for us in that moment. That hurt is true. From everything that we can sense into, that hurt is true. So I would suggest for those kind of hurts that it is useful to do an exercise. Right? This is something that Jed McKenna talks about a lot. He calls it autolysis, but it's just writing down whatever comes into your mind. Let's say about this particular event or series of events or whole childhood or whatever, but just the sort of the root cause of the hurt, and just let it rip. Don't hold back. Get petty. Get childish. I mean, that's when you were hurt, was when you were a child. Tell it from a child's point of view. Just say whatever nasty, petty, judgmental, silly, anything. Don't even try to figure out whether it's right or not, or fair or not, or spiritual or not, or don't try to philosophize about it. Don't try to say, well, I'm really a spiritual person, so I shouldn't feel that. No, just step into the role. Step into that hurt and let that hurt talk. Do it in writing. Don't do it to the other person's face. Right? That sort of causes, this sort of continues the issue, right? But do it on paper. But just say whatever it is that you can possibly imagine, and take your time with it. It's not something that may happen in an hour or an afternoon or a few days, maybe a week or two. Maybe a month to really, just be willing to see whatever it is that's there fully, without reservation at any kind. Don't do it from your higher self, where you try to make sense out of it or anything. Do it from your hurt self. That's who needs to be expressed, right? But just do it fully. I mean, just absolutely fully. Expletives, to your heart's content. All right, just get it down on paper. You don't have to save it for posterity, but it's helpful just to get it down on paper once thoroughly. Just squeeze sort of every last drop out of whatever storyline has been swirling in the mind for maybe years and years. Okay. So maybe at this point we're able to look at it a little bit more objectively. Okay. So one of the exercises that Byron Katie does is, if someone has an issue, is to ask them to write a story. This isn't weeks and months, it's just maybe a couple of pages where we can, do our best to sort of summarize the essence of the story that we explored in much more depth through this autolysis. In this case, maybe write a page or two, tell a story accurately but briefly, as objectively as we can. So she had people do this, and then once it was down on 2 or 3 pages, she asked them to go through and then cross out all the adjectives and adverbs in the story, and then rewrite the story without those in there. So the adjectives and adverbs are all the interpretations, judgments from our personal point of view. So if we strip those out, then we get down to the core story. What, as best we can, what were the circumstances that actually happened? So it's important as we distill down the story to be as specific as possible. So it's much more useful to say, let's see, my mother told me that I would never get that job because I wasn't smart enough. Okay, that's quite a specific statement. It might be part of a much bigger story, but it's much more helpful to get that particular story in black and white than it is to say, my mother never appreciated me. Right? You see the difference? Just as specific as we possibly can be. Another example might be, my dad never hugged me. That's specific. It's more useful than saying, my dad never cared about me. Much more difficult to deal with. So in both of those cases, we have, when we distill it all down, in one case, we have someone said something to us that we didn't like, didn't appreciate. Another case, someone didn't give us something that we wanted. Okay, those things happen, right? So at this point, if we've really aired out the laundry and, expressed our feelings, maybe we're getting into the territory where we're ready to see, to ask questions about the other person's behavior. One of the questions that we could ask at this point is the other person responsible for what they said or did? The immediate response might be, hell yes, they're responsible, We need to be careful if we're willing, if we're deciding that the other person is responsible for their actions totally, then we have to apply that same standard to ourselves. Am I willing to always be responsible for my actions? I'm not saying that we're not responsible for our actions, but I am saying that when we begin to look at it, we can see how much of our own actions or speech or behavior is a result of prior conditioning. How we were brought up, circumstances, events in our life, how we were conditioned. When we start to really look at it, we can see how thoroughly conditioned we've been. We can trace back, we find ourselves liking certain things, not liking other things, having certain opinions. In every area of our life, if we trace it back, how did that originate? Had we been brought up in another family, in another culture, in another economic environment, in another religion, in another racial household, what would, would we still have the same opinions and ideas and beliefs about the world that we have now? Well, I would suggest that we wouldn't. All of that, so much of that is a result of what's gone before. So again, coming back to the sense of, well, is the other person then responsible for their behavior? Or am I responsible for my behavior? I would suggest that what we are responsible for is to act within the limits of our understanding and with the idea that we're always available to better understand things. You know, it's not a static thing like, hey, I've set my boundaries, that's how I'm going to behave, and, you know, other people get used to it. But it's helpful to see that we ourselves, if we can feel into it, sense into the limitations that we've all felt from our prior conditioning in terms of our personality or behavior or our ideas about our skills or our intelligence or how the world works. All of these are things that we've learned along the way. And those beliefs that we've adopted mostly unconsciously then affect our experiences. We have the belief that the world is a dangerous place. We have to be on our toes. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Events seem to arise that confirm that belief. You know, we find ourselves acting as if that's going to happen, and often it does, right? We seem to attract confirmation of that belief. And the opposite is true as well. You know, if we believe that the world is essentially a beneficent place of abundance, we can afford to be generous, the world tends to respond in that same way. So in that sense, beliefs generate experiences, and experiences generate beliefs. It's sort of a circular path where it's sort of our beliefs become self-confirming. So when we look out at the world and we see, well, let's say the situation that it's in today, the issues that the world is dealing with are man-made, they're mentally created. You know, they're mentally created out of a set of beliefs that we've been conditioned to believe. And out of those beliefs, we act in a certain way, you know, as a larger population, then that creates the experience that we see when we turn on the news at night. Right? Right? Totally man-made chaos. But it's a function of our conditioning. So, but to come back to this sense of hurt within ourselves, to see how that hurt has caused our view of the world to be sort of locked in place in a way. If we've, you know, if we try to just sort of forcefully, you know, get rid of this hurt, you know, by sheer willpower, you know, it doesn't actually go away until we understand it. You know, if we try to suppress it, we energize it, right? The only reason we try to suppress it is if we have the sense that it's so big, I can't deal with it. You know, so we've given it the enormity bigger than us. And the only way I can try to do it is to squirrel it away somewhere. But the only place we have to put it is in these bodies. You know, so as we do that year after year, that energy, that negative holding on has consequences to this, this physical body, right? Becomes more concretized. You know, there are skilled physical therapists out there that can help to release this energy directly. And what we're talking about here is more really understanding how that functions. So what I'm not talking about is trying to go back when I say to look at it more closely, to look at it in depth. I'm not really talking about looking at it in the sense of really figuring out who's to blame, who did what, or who should have done what. None of that. Okay, not at all what we're talking about. You know, what we're really looking at is the one way to look at it is the consequences of holding on to that pain, that hurt. There can be that sense of, you know, I'm just right. You know I'm right, and to let the other person off the hook would just be, you know, a disservice to myself. But yet at the same time, holding on to that unforgiveness is a disservice to ourselves too. I mean, even physically, you know, certainly emotionally as well, but even physically. So it's almost like, you know, by being unforgiving, we've sort of drunk the poison ourselves, but we expect the other person to die. You know, somehow we hold out the possibility that they'll, you know, finally, if I just hold out, you know, my unforgiveness long enough, they'll finally see the light. You know, they'll come crawling back and apologizing to me. And no, that's not going to happen. Right? It'd be really unusual. Right? If we're waiting for that, if we're waiting for the other person to see the light and finally come around to our viewpoint about what happened, then our happiness, our peace is dependent on their behavior. One of the things that we can see really easily, I mean, it's not even a spiritual thing, just seeing that, you know, we don't have that much control over the other person's behavior. I mean, even if we're in a, you know, spousal, you know, intimate relationship with someone, we still don't have that much control, nor should we. But, you know, that effort to try to make me happy by changing the other person, it just doesn't work. Right? So if we're waiting, if we're hanging on to this resentment, hoping one day the other person will finally see the light, it's really like the other person's holding the handle end of the leash. You know, you're on the other end. You know, because your peace and happiness is dependent on what they may or may not do in the future. You know, you don't have any choice about what they may or may not do. Never did. What you do have choice, maybe not as a young child, right? But we do have a choice now with some level of maturity to decide whether we react to the insult or not. Okay, we don't have the choice of, you know, whether this person may say or do something. We may have the choice to, you know, remove ourselves from the relationship, remove ourselves from that, you know, toxic work environment, sure. But in the meantime, we have the choice of whether we will let their behavior stir up this turmoil of emotions within us. We do have that choice. But we only have that choice if we can see this whole insidious, thorough level of conditioning operating in all of us. Right? Some conditioning is good. That's fine. We don't have a problem with that. But that conditioning that causes us, you know, to see things, you know, out of a sense of blame or guilt, or you know, they shouldn't have done this, or I know what's right or wrong, or all of that mental activity is what um, is the result of that conditioning, is our belief in that conditioning. So before we're able to forgive that in another person, whatever their behavior was, it's much, much easier to see it in ourselves first. See the degree of conditioning that we've succumbed to in this lifetime. See it really, really clearly. We can also see in our own lives how difficult it's been to overcome some of that conditioning along the way. Really difficult, right? You know, all those self-limiting beliefs. You know, and maybe over the course of time, you know, we've seen through that a little bit. Maybe we've taken a few steps further down the path than the person who hurt us had at the time of the hurt. But we can see that we're all in that continuum. Maybe maybe it's, you know, that conditioning causes more suffering over there. Okay. Maybe a little less suffering here, but we can see that even in our own lives, maybe with as much effort as we've put into it, we're still functioning to a large degree out of that conditioning. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Byron Katie here. She has a quote, life is simple when we understand that life is something that is done for us rather than to us. That everything happens exactly when it needs to happen. Not a moment too soon, not a moment too late. You know, it's not easy, it's not fun, but if we understand that it's for our learning, it's much easier. Okay, so here's a belief system, right? The sense of, you know, things happen and they're happening for me rather than to me. So this is taking life as an opportunity to learn about ourselves in an ever deeper way. Okay, it's a belief, right? We don't know if that's actually absolutely true under all circumstances, that this is how life works, right? It's a belief. I've often talked about the limitations of belief, but there's some beliefs that actually have a usefulness to them. And this kind of belief, I like to call it a useful construct, right? It's a concept, it's a construct. Life is for our benefit. You know, do you know that's true? Do you know that it's not true? You know, we don't really. But I will say one thing, if we assume that that's true, life looks different. Life really looks different. You know, to suggest this too early in the process, you know, without fully experiencing, being willing to experience our hurt without reservation. If we do it too soon, it doesn't work. But if we really see, we allow our hurt to be expressed, you know, we see the extent of our conditioning so that we can see the extent of the other person's conditioning. And then finally, we may be in a position to see that, well, maybe this is true. Maybe things do happen for my benefit. You know, I mean, even we'll find out, you know, later on whether that's actually true or not. But even if it's not true, approaching life from that position sort of opens us up to the possibility of learning from all circumstances. That has some benefit. I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm not saying that the other person, trying to whitewash the other person's behavior. I'm not saying that, what's right or wrong or justified or blame. None of that. I'm just saying that what happened. In the entire existence of the universe, in that moment or for that period of time, conditions were such that that is what happened. The other person behaved as they behaved. You responded as you responded. You interpreted it as you did. That whole package. The entire history of the universe, that moment happened. A unique, totally unique moment. So unless we can say for sure that that shouldn't have happened, that somehow existence was wrong, we can open ourselves up for the possibility of saying, well, what if that was actually for my benefit? Again, I'm not saying that it was easy, nice, fair, just, none of that. But I am saying that it happened. And so we're in a position of trying to decide whether, the universe is a beneficent place or not, right? If we decide it's not, it's just sort of a materialistic thing, atoms bumping into each other. We won't get into who created the atoms, but the atoms bumping into each other, humans bumping into each other, and things happen, right? One viewpoint, popular. But the other possibility is that there is some underlying intelligence at work here, and there is the possibility in this lifetime, and maybe other lifetimes, but in this lifetime, at least we're here, we're now, we're conscious. We have the opportunity to see the reality. Reality isn't dependent on whether we think it's beneficent or not. It's reality, right? It doesn't need our approval. It doesn't need us to be on its side, right? We don't actually have a choice. It's reality. But if we can begin to see things, once we've explored the depth of the muck and the turmoil and let it all out, that has to happen first. But what we're talking about is now coming back to a place of being able to really being willing to see if there's a possibility of learning something at that point. So, if we look back on something that was hard, something that was really difficult, something that caused us pain, something that may still be causing us pain, until now, it wouldn't have been fair to ask that question. But from this space of seeing the conditioned response, the sort of uniqueness of this particular situation, it begins to be fair to ask the question of, despite all the ugliness of that situation, did I learn anything of value from it? Did I learn anything that I couldn't have otherwise learned? Did I learn something that caused me to be a better person today? For a lot of people, it's those kind of situations that propelled us on the spiritual path in the first place. That kind of pain, just wanting to find some kind of resolution. So again, I'm not saying that it was right or fair or just or anything, but if we can even see that there was some benefit there, we begin to loosen our grip on it. You know, if we can loosen that insistence, that resentment within ourselves, then we can loosen our antagonism towards the other person. So at this point, maybe for the first time, forgiveness then becomes a possibility. We can see it, we can sort of justify it. We're not fighting with ourselves. We can see that there is some way, even logically, that I can get to that point, you know, without doing harm to myself. But we're still talking about ordinary forgiveness here. So I want to, just as a last point here, I want to talk about something that's beyond ordinary forgiveness. And that is when we truly recognize what we are as awareness itself. And we can see that that awareness, despite everything that's happened to us, all the good, bad, ugly, everything that's ever happened to us, that awareness in itself, in its purity, is as pristine as the day we were born. Right? Body may have been hurt in many ways. Mentally, we may have been hurt. We may have been abused. All too common. But even so, that awareness is still intact. It's what's operating right this moment. It's not in any way absent. And if we can see that awareness in ourselves, see it as already present, already fully functional, already at peace, already non-judgmental. If we can see it here, we will be able to soon see it in the other person, all other persons, all other situations. May that awareness, as it, you know, flows through these thoroughly conditioned body minds, may get clouded, disrupted, you know, so the result coming out of the behavior, what comes out of people's mouths, you know, may not be at all clear, but that underlying source is clear, is non-judgmental, is pure. But we have to see it for ourselves first. We can't just try to spiritualize our way of believing it as a concept. That doesn't work. But if we see it in ourselves, we can see it in the other person. When we see that, we can see that the behavior is all a function of conditioning, all of it. If it's all a function of conditioning, where's the blame? If there's no blame, no need for forgiveness. No forgiveness is real forgiveness. No forgiveness because there's no need to forgive, right? There's only a need to forgive if we first establish blame, first establish wrongness in the other person. So we talked at first about a two-step process. First we get hurt, then we maybe sometime later forgive. But here we're recognizing that hurt is our option in terms of how we respond, and we can see it all. Whatever behavior we're reacting to is function of conditioning, and yet that awareness is fully operational in the other person as well as here. And if it's all the result of conditioning, no blame. Even the concept of forgiveness drops away. We don't even get to step one, right? Don't get to step one, there's no need for step two. In the meantime, forgiveness, sure, if we can do it authentically, right? But don't force it, you know, see it. That's the important part.